My next guest needs no introduction. Dr. Christian Northrup is an OB/GYN physician, a leading authority in the field of women's health and wellness, and a New York Times best-selling author. Her books include Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom, The Wisdom of Menopause, and Goddesses Never Age, The Secret Prescription for Radiance, Vitality, and Well-Being. In Making Life Easy, a simple guide to a divinely inspired life, Dr. Northrup shares his secrets to mind, body, spirit well-being. Highly sensitive people, or empaths, see life through the eyes of compassion and caring. They were born that way. As a result, they carry a tremendous amount of inner light. But they're also the favored prey of vampires who feed off empaths' energy and disrupt their lives on every level: physical, emotional, and financial. In Dodging Energy Vampires, Dr. Christian Northrup draws on the latest research in this exciting new field, along with stories from her global community and her own life, to explore the phenomena of energy vampires and show us how we can spot them, dodge their tactics, and take back our own energy. Okay. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
That's good. Thank you for your time to talk to me today. I've been a massive Hay House fan for the past 8 or so years. And obviously those years have been my biggest growth years as well. So
right.
To you today is just like next level. I have to pinch myself that this is actually happening.
Thank you.
Please excuse me if I'm a little bit nervous or if I stumble over my own words. Yeah.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, so Dodging Energy Vampires, an empath's guide to evading relationships that drain you and restoring your health and power. Why this book? Why now, Dr. Northrup?
Because after 40 years at the front lines of women's health, I began to notice a pattern in myself and in especially the women who had mystery illnesses: Lyme disease, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, things that we don't have a real handle on. And what I noticed, because also my background in medicine, understanding character disorder from psychiatry and what's called cluster B, I began to put these things all together based on personal and professional experience, and finally realized, wait a minute. I have been spending the better part of my life trying to please and be recognized by a certain type of person, and they don't seem to appreciate anything I do, and no matter what I do, they want more, and I would feel less than. My self-esteem was all tied up with whether they were interested in me or not, whether that be a patient or a romantic relationship or a business relationship. It didn't matter. And I began to see a pattern that came from decades of personal experience. And then I just put together what I knew as a doctor, what I knew about the immune system, what I knew about the soul, what I knew about cluster B, personality disorder, character disordered people. And finally came up with Dodging Energy Vampires, because I realized that this was a type of relationship that was draining people like you and me, people who believe the best about humanity, people who are wanting to work with the construction gang and not the wrecking crew, people who want to make a better world, people who are conscientious, loyal, hardworking, and yet we always seem to be one down to the people who are larger than life, often very attractive, very charismatic. Throughout my career, one of the things I noticed a lot in spiritual communities, yoga communities and so on, way too often there was a guru at the head of the whole thing, having sex with every devotee there was, and the devastating effects of this on the women that I saw. Then what did we have? Then we finally, after we started to realize the number of women who'd been sexually abused, or had their energy used in that way. Then we finally woke up to the number of men who've had the same thing.
Yes.
At the movie Spotlight, I'll never forget the closing credits for the movie Spotlight about the number of children, especially boys, sexually abused by priests. And it's every country in the world. And it went, I mean, the credits rolled and on and on and on and on. You know, this thing that you think is happening in one area, Boston, Massachusetts, you realize is global. And it is the same thing with the energy vampires. And I really believe that right now, in just coming into 2020, we're going to see the light shining on this kind of darkness that's been running the planet for millennia. But what is our job? Our personal job, each and every one of us, is to take our personal pain and darkness and transform it, because that which is not transformed is just transferred.
Yes.
And so, you know, when I describe a character disorder person, or someone reads it in the book, what happens is they begin to have names come into their head.
It's exactly what happened for me.
Yeah, because it's one in 5 people. And now remember, it's a spectrum. So there's some that just have they're a little self-centered, and you can deal with them. And then on the other end is the outright psychopath, Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, Bill Cosby, the ones that are in the news. But for everyone that's in the news, there are thousands of others just making people's lives a living hell until we wake up. Now, the other thing in this forum where we are today, there's always going to be somebody, lots of people, who say to me, well, isn't that just naming them, calling them energy vampires, isn't that divisive? And, you know, if that's not kind, it's not compassionate. And I understand that, because that's exactly what an empath would do. We want to be kind, we want to be compassionate. But here's what we do. We overshoot. We give them the benefit of the doubt, and then we doubt ourselves. So I said in the book that empaths are born with an inferior ego. We don't feel good enough about ourselves. So we look for things to improve about ourselves, to keep that inferior ego alive. And the vampires are born with a superior ego. They think that their shit doesn't smell. You know, I mean, way out on one spectrum. So you can imagine, in a soul level relationship, those of us with an inferior ego would, of course, attract those with a superior ego, because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They will keep telling us how inadequate we are until we finally wake up and say, enough. I think a lot about the movie The Color Purple, way back, that Oprah was in, one of her first roles. And there's a scene in there where the main character, Celie, realizes that the energy vampire guy, played by Danny Glover, had been keeping the letters from her friend Shug away from her. All these letters, he just kept them away. And she finally rises up. She rises up at dinner, and she looks at him, and she says, if you keep this up, every bit you're doing this, your life will rot. Your life will rot. And she stands up, and just in all of her power. Tina Turner did the same thing with Ike. Way back when she started to do the Buddhist chanting. And she stood in the parking lot. She had $1 to her name. And he came up to beat her up or kill her or whatever. And she just looked at him, because in truth, these people are paper tigers. And when you truly confront them, there's nothing there. It's like the Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to the man behind the screen. It's just exactly like that, which is why that story has such appeal. And, you know, it's archetypal. It comes up over and over and over, that story. Now, there's a new story now, and it's no mistake that the Disney cartoon, Frozen 2, has just come out.
Yes, yes.
This is the story of reparations for all of the damage done by energy vampires
Mm.
to indigenous people, to the
Yes,
planet, to
yes,
women, to
yes.
femininity. And what has to happen? Each of us has to stand up like Elsa,
Mm.
own our power, go in and right the wrongs. Well, the first wrong is that you felt bad about yourself. You felt guilty about yourself. You felt never enough. That is the first person who needs to be rescued.
Yes.
Yourself.
When,
Yourself.
when I read your book and when you started talking about the traits that these women have, I said to my husband, does this sound like me? And I read through them. And after about the fourth one, I started crying. Oh, I'm full of goosebumps. When I read through that list of traits, after about the third or fourth one, I started crying. And I said to my husband, how could I not realize that this was me? And then all the names started. And like you are saying, the names started coming in. Some big players in my life with
Oh, yeah.
some of the
Always.
tendencies, and some of them that I've actually realized, and I've started stepping away from these people because even before reading your book, I realized that they were draining me. But this book, I wish we could clone you. I wish there were more people like you in the universe that could put the medical knowledge that you have together with the soul, because I do believe that they need to work together.
They must work together. Now, way back in the time of Descartes, he made a deal with the Roman Catholic Church, which was, of course, a global force at that time. And he said, okay, I'll take the body, you take the soul. And the mind-body split
Yes,
happened then in Western culture.
yes,
And because in ancient times, like ancient Egypt,
yeah,
the priests were the doctors were priests.
yes,
And you cannot care for a person adequately without caring for their soul. And these two things are they're so split.
yes,
And every good doctor knows this on some level, but we don't want to know it because it's so powerful. I'll give you an example from being in the operating room. The operating room is now the sanctum sanctorum. It is, we have switched out religion for medicine.
yeah,
And so in the operating room, we don our ceremonial gowns and gloves, and there's a whole thing that happens in the operating room. And what is so hard for a surgeon to understand is the sacredness of this situation, because you've put someone to sleep, but on some level, and these studies have been done, we know they hear every word, every word.
yes,
And that surgery is such a potent time for transformation, because the person is being put to sleep. And if you can use it as a time of transformation, like saying certain things as they go to sleep, certain things as they wake up, like Peggy Huddleston's work way back in the 80s. It's an enormously potent time. But when you are ready to make the opening incision, and you'd like the anesthesiologist to talk to the patient and to tell them they will awaken hungry, they will be comfortable, all of that. There's so much resistance to that in the operating room, because somehow we know inside how holy that is.
yes,
And to really own it, is to transform everything.
yes,
So the only way to do that now is to know it in yourself, and to comport yourself as a physician, as a nurse, as a healer, as an acupuncturist, to comport yourself as a emissary from God, from the healing powers. That's what all shamans do. Let this energy come through you. You know, back when I was an intern at St. Margaret's Hospital for Women, which was run by the Sisters of Mercy in Boston, at the scrub sink, they had a prayer to Archangel Raphael.
yes.
and it was, so you'd sit there and I'd read the prayer, and it was about how no human could possibly do this on their own. So you prayed to Archangel Raphael to work through you as you were operating. And I remember sitting there and scrubbing, thinking, thank goodness I'm not the only one here responsible for this.
Yes.
Because we have to believe in something greater than ourselves. And what energy vampires are here to do, I think, is to insert such self-doubt that we eventually, finally, if we don't die, we finally wake up and we become, the old adage, strong in the broken places.
Yes. Sure.
Yeah.
So many good things that you said there. If we look at shame and guilt, that's two emotions that make a regular appearance in the book. And
yes.
You quote Dr. Mario Martinez from his book, The Mind-Body Code, that all tribes wound their members with 3 archetypal wounds: shame, abandonment, and betrayal. I'm curious
Yes.
to hear more about your take on that.
Yes. When I first heard Dr. Martinez speak, when I was sent the CDs for his book, The Mind-Body Code, from Sounds True, back when cars actually had CD players. And I listened to his voice for hours. And I thought, this makes more sense than anything I have ever heard. Because what he says, and this gets internalized into our tissue, all tribes wound their way, they're all cultures in these 3 ways. Now, what he points out is every family, every religion, every profession has certain rules that you're supposed to all agree on.
Yes.
And the minute somebody doesn't agree, and so in ancient times, they would have this thing called a pale, a fence.
Yes.
So you must stay inside the pale and we will protect you.
Yes.
So you've heard the phrase beyond the pale. She went beyond the pale. It just means she jumped the fence. Well, we know that nobody for most of human history could survive on their own without their group of people, without their community. So that meant that you had to believe what your tribe believed, what they told you to believe, or they wouldn't take care of you. So here we are, and you come in, let's say, as an empath, and you believe in shaman. I mean, we've just been reading about Kepler and Galileo. I mean, the Catholic Church nearly burned those people as heretics, and 9 million women and the men who supported them were burned as witches because of the Malleus Maleficarum in the Middle Ages, which was the hammer of the witches. And the only thing you had to do to be called a witch was to heal with herbs or be a midwife. And so deeply inside us is this fear that if we move beyond the pale, we will be shamed, we will be abandoned, we will be betrayed. And that is the experience of so many old soul empaths. I mean, instead of, I'll just give you an example of it. I mean, I've had hundreds in my own career, but way back, I had a patient with arthritis of the knees. And I put her on alfalfa tablets because the alfalfa root goes way into the earth. And there were these essential minerals in the tablets, and her knees got better.
Yes.
All right. Her internist called the head of my medical group to complain about me, that this woman is giving her alfalfa. To me, it's like, but her knees are better.
Exactly.
I mean, it's like, and then I think that one of my colleagues told me a story where he went to another person who knew me, and it's like, you're better. Or let's say a patient, this is standard. You go back to the doctor, you have no more cancer. They gave you 6 months to live.
Yes.
4 years later, you decide to roll in and say, hey, I might as well show up and tell you that some people, and the doctor looks up heavenward and doesn't even acknowledge you. It's like, one of my friends years and years ago was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and she got better just from loving herself every day, and was very well documented. So then when she went back, they told her, well, you couldn't have had it in the first place because this is not how it is.
Yes.
So you see, anything that flies in the face of what you believe to be true,
Yes.
science is loaded with this. Emil Semmelweis says, I think we should wash our hands before attending to these pregnant women, because back in those days, it was safer to deliver at home than in the hospital. We seem to be going back to those days at this point. And so every pioneer has been betrayed, abandoned, shamed.
Yes.
Very, very often. And by the way, it takes 17 years on average for a new medical piece of knowledge to get ingrained into the profession. So I was just reading in my medical literature in Medscape, what they call, some of the new studies that have crashed old dogma. And there's a famous physicist that says science moves forward one funeral at a time. And it's really, really true. So we have data, which, by the way, I put in the first edition of The Wisdom of Menopause in 2001, but in 2019, Medscape is finally looking at the data that humans keep creating new cells in the hippocampus, in the memory area of the brain. We keep making new cells and adding to that for our whole lives. In your 90s, you're adding new cells. Now, the old dogma was you have all the brain cells you'll ever have at the age of 25, and after that, they start to die off. And it's simply not true. Well, the first people to come up with that idea were roundly criticized. They always are. It's like, we know this isn't true. If it were true, this is what people say. Well, if that were true, my doctor would have told me. We would have known it by now. It's like, no.
They don't know.
And by the way, it is so, let's be clear, shame is the most painful experience any human is capable of. It means, in the words of Brene Brown, you are a mistake. Guilt says I made a mistake. Shame says I am a mistake. And nothing is worse than that. And so little children are entrained in their families. This is who you must be. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who I knew way back, said, we make children into little prostitutes. I will love you if.
Yes, absolutely.
And so here we are, a whole bunch of sensitive people, empaths, who know things without proof, who feel things that others don't feel.
Yes.
And the darkness, capital D, the energy vampires have been running the planet. Big pharma, big agriculture, Monsanto, all of it. But we can't, as individuals, take that on. I mean, we can help out.
Yes.
But our job as individuals is to be the light that we are and no longer doubt ourselves. So when you were reading that list and you talked to your husband about it, then what happened after that?
I started I started remembering instances where I went with my gut feeling and the universe had my back. Right. And then I started looking at situations differently and seeing how, number one, I'm always happy to please other people. Right. And in situations where I should have said, no, this is not right. So that there's a certain part in the book as well where you say, we don't share our vulnerabilities in relationships because we don't believe that we are valuable enough and that we should be loved. And all of those things just started falling into place for me. And then I still went back to my old patterns, and I went why did I not know this? So I started blaming myself.
Which is the worst thing you can do.
Exactly. And then I thought, no, hang on. Let's take in what the book is saying. And then, so yes, I think it's like you say as well in the book, you heal in layers. So I do think that it's a book that I will read again and again and again, because more and more things will come up for me. What you were saying just now about the medical profession as well, I've had that myself. My daughter was she was about 3 years old when she had like recurring ear infections. So we would go off to the doctor every time, and every time the doctor would just give her antibiotics.
Antibiotic. Yep.
After about the fourth round, I thought to myself, there must be a better way. I cannot keep pumping this stuff into my little kid's body.
Right.
And then the universe sent a chiropractor my way. Her daughter was a couple of months older than my daughter, and we used to go to the same mothers group. And she said to me that she had developed this this ear massage technique that helps drain fluids out of the ear channel. And then, so I started going to her, and lo and behold, the ear infection started clearing up. So I had a standing appointment with the ear, nose, and throat specialist. So I went back to him and I said to him, we're back here today. We tried that stuff. And he interrupted me and he said, oh, well, and it mustn't have worked, because otherwise, why would you back here? Why would you be back here today? And I said, no, actually, we're back here because we had the appointment and it's cleared up. And he said to me, no, it couldn't have worked. Let me take a look. And he took a look in her ears and he's like, oh, wow, that's strange. It worked. And numerous other instances. So this book just really reminded me once again, and I know this, like I know the universe has got my back. I know my gut feeling is always very, very strong. There's something, I promise you, I swear this book was written for me. That section where you say, we often use not fairy cards, guidance, oracle cards.
Oh yeah, or oracle cards, pendulums.
And I promise you, Dr. Northrup, like 5 minutes before that, I was sitting with my cards and I just got goosebumps. I could not believe it. So, this book I really wish we could clone you, that more and more people would start believing this stuff.
Okay. Well, I think that they are. I believe that they are. I believe what we're going to find now with the Pluto-Saturn conjunction, January 12th, we're going to see people waking up all over the planet. It's the beginning. Well, it's been going on. 2019 was a very rough year for many people. Yes. It was the breakdown of old patterns in relationship, at work, where people just couldn't stand it anymore. You know, they finally saw the truth. And as each of us becomes the light that we are, it makes it easier for the next person and the next person and the next person. So, I mean, just the fact that we have the technology, the Zoom technology for you and I to speak in this way, all the way across the world, from Maine to Australia, is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. So we're connected, even though big tech is trying to censor any of this kind of thing. And they are really, okay, but the way I see it is our job is to stop feeding the monster. And so stop feeding the monster. If it's your child, if it's your mother, if it's your husband, stop feeding the monster individually in your life. And then you'll be much more vibrant and healthy, in order to stop feeding the big monster of big pharma and all the forces that want to control humanity. I say to people, the movie Matrix is a documentary.
Yes.
And we're coming out with Matrix 4.
Yes.
It's coming out. So yeah, and then Fahrenheit 451, a documentary. These things, I mean, darkness is working very hard to keep humanity enslaved, very hard. And also keep us from talking to each other. I mean, look at what they've done with the vaccine mandates. They have split people, or in the United States, they've split the Democrats and the Republicans. Anything that drives a wedge.
Yes, they
people. It actually doesn't matter who you are. We have more things in common as humans. But remember, 1 in 5 is an energy vampire. So they get energy when they split people apart. There are families that do this. A mother who says at bedtime to her 3 children, oh, you're my favorite. And then goes into the bedroom of another, oh, you're my favorite. That's called splitting. It's how you get power. You keep the kids fighting for your attention. And it's in the same way. In medicine, you have to follow the party line now or be banished.
Yes.
For years, I'd go into the hospital and I'd go to the doctor's lounge where we had the doctor's mailboxes. And I swear to you, every time I walked in there, I was sure my eviction notice would be
in there.
Would be there. You know, it's like I would, or every time I went to renew my license, you know, I was sure that they were going to remove it. And, you know, it was because I was always outside of the pale, pushing it as far as I possibly could because I knew what people needed. So I would really trust in God and a higher power and the patients who would be working with me. But let me be clear, at any given time, 25 to 30% of my patients had these character disorders.
Yes.
And it was like, help me, you can't. Help me, you can't. And they'd keep me on the hook because they weren't there to get well. They were there to get my energy because sick was a phenomenal way to get energy. They never get sick enough to die.
Yes.
They just get sick enough to manipulate everybody in the family.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So I know this path really well. And, you know, it took some courage to write a book with this title. And luckily for me, Reed Tracy of Hay House was perfectly willing to, because, you know, Hay House has been all about, and I knew Louise Hay for years personally. And I think if Louise had still been alive, they wouldn't have published the book because Louise was about always staying positive.
Yes.
And I believe that that is a wonderful way to be, unless helping someone else is hurting you. And there's way too many people like me who really do this thing called othering. Like they're paying much more attention to what's going on with others than themselves. And it's a very ingrained pattern for an old soul empath. I mean, we actually, I think, from being burned at the stake and pushed off the mountain lifetime after lifetime, we don't actually believe that anyone is going to notice when we're tired or we have a need. So we specialize in making sure that everyone else is fed. Plus, because we have those super traits, we really have a lot of energy to give to others. I mean, it's kind of unbelievable.
Yes, doesn't matter how tired we are, we keep going because there's work to be done. People need us.
That's it.
Yes.
That's it. So what we have to realize, I remember years ago, I had some kind of psychic reading, and what she said to me is, "You're here to serve, but you're not supposed to be the main course."
Oh, that's so nice. That is so nice. So full disclosure, I'm a type 1 diabetic, and I was diagnosed when I was 8 years old. Yes. And I want to, like, if I think about all the things that you said in this book, it thought to me that you wrote this book for me. There's a part where you say, I just want to read it out of the book because I've highlighted it here. I've known several highly sensitive people who attract vampires like a magnet, who have high blood sugar despite an almost perfect diet. Me. And in all cases, these individuals sugarcoat everything they say and do. They appear to be literally unable to feel their anger. They instead go right to forgiveness and compassion. Once again, me. And on you wrote, and still, until we can stop taking on the energy of others and draining our own, we're apt to do two things. Number one, be attracted to sugar, carbs, and or alcohol. And number two, keep weight on no matter what we do, even if we stop eating carbs. And I swear that's my lifeline. Like, because of Hay House, I'm very much into forgiveness and being in the positive and of course, like it sits right with me being positive about people and always thinking the best of people, you know? And then when you wrote that part about the keeping weight on, I'm like, my diet, my diet is better than anyone else's that I know. Because
I
as
believe it.
type 1 diabetic, I have to count every single carb that I put in my mouth, even trace carbs in salad. And yet I'm not the build of a typical type 1 diabetic.
Not at all. No.
Not at all. And I cannot seem to lose this weight around my solar plexus. And it was so strange. Like, and I know there's a lot of shame and guilt around me eating that I only realized once I started reading this book, that it spoke to me like on another level. And just yesterday, so one thing I never ever ate was ice cream. I never enjoyed ice cream. But yesterday we took the kids to the beach and we were walking around, and I said to my husband, let's buy the kids some ice cream. So I bought the children ice cream, and I said to my husband, can I, because I would normally take one lick of his and I would say, no, not for me, thank you. So I took a bite of his ice cream and I'm like, that's really nice. I think I'm going to eat this ice cream. And you know what? I ate that whole ice cream and I loved it. I enjoyed it. And because we live very close to the beach where we live now, we walked to the beach, we walked there, we walked back. So when I got home, I tasted my sugar and it was absolutely perfect. And I enjoyed that ice cream.
Yes.
I could not believe it. It was, yes.
So, that is, what a beautiful story that is.
Yes.
That is a beautiful story. That's right. You ate it for your pleasure with absolutely no guilt. So therefore there was no rise in the cortisol.
Yes.
And the stress hormones.
Yes.
And therefore the way it was metabolized was completely different.
Yes. And I often, because I'm type 1 diabetic and medical literature teaches us there's nothing you can do about it, you can just manage it. Yes, that is true. But on some level, if Dr. Joe Dispenza can grow himself a new spine, then I must be able to get over this. But I never knew exactly where to start digging and where to start. And I think this book is honestly, it's a path for me to go forward, because there must be a way that we can heal type 1 diabetes.
I believe you. I absolutely agree with you. And of course, we've got more and more of it because of vitamin D levels being so low. And also, I believe because of the huge number of childhood vaccines now that kids are being given.
Started on that. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. That's one of my, my fearless platforms where I've jumped the fence long ago. I mean, my kids are in their 30s. They had maybe 2 vaccines. I just never, I knew that we didn't need them because at the time of, for instance, the polio epidemic, that was on the way out when the vaccine was being introduced. So you really have to do your own research, but talk about medical heresy. I mean, that's one where, but I'm not going to be burned at the stake this time around. So I feel okay with
I think every time you post on social media about vaccines, I see people jumping on there. And no matter how many times you tell these people, just do your own research, just go and read. Don't just listen to what they say, do your own research. People don't want to, and you can't make them if they're not ready for it.
Well, that's the same with one of the questions that I'm asked a lot is, what do you do when you see your daughter with an energy vampire or
that was one of the questions. A friend, yes.
A friend, yeah. What do you do? Because it's exactly the same.
Yes.
When they've made up their mind that let's be clear, it's painful to know the truth. Because you have to change your life.
Yes.
When you know the truth. I mean, when you know that you're married to an energy vampire and you don't know how you're going to make a living, that creates what's called cognitive dissonance. So, which is very painful for people. So you believe that you married the man of your dreams and that he truly loves you. But then you find from everyday life, it's anything but loving. And you realize that you have to leave, but it's like these two things don't match.
Yes.
And so it's much easier, especially for an empath, to just decide, well, it's okay, I can put up with this. I probably only have 25 more years left. And so I'll just keep putting up. And until it's too painful, you will not wake up. But when it becomes too painful, and that's, by the way, that's where we are astrologically right now. It's like we're in a nutcracker, like a walnut in a nutcracker, and it's crushing that shell. But the soul is inside and it's very sweet. So people will often say, many people who've read this book and gotten out of a bad job or relationship, they'll say, oh, it was really painful, but I am so glad. My life is so good. Because what happens, you create a new point of attraction. So suddenly there's a time, yes, where the old goes away. So the old relationships aren't there. The new ones haven't shown up yet. And that's the place of faith, where you just have to have faith. And really, that's what Hay House is all about. You don't have the guarantee. See, medicine, the way it's practiced now, it gives you this false guarantee. If we do this, we're going to take care of you. Then you realize it's the Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to the man behind the screen. I mean, the chemotherapy, the war on cancer, the war on drugs, the war on germs. They've just created more of everything. I don't know about Australia, but in the United States, 47% of kids now have a chronic disease. And,
on the rocket as well.
It's crazy. If you can't see that at this point, my dad was a holistic dentist. He wouldn't have called himself that, but he was. And he had a saying that I think was very useful. And when people aren't ready to hear it, he would say, you're just going to have to leave him where Jesus flang him. Until it gets so bad, there's nothing you can do except that you can keep praying, you can keep sending divine love, not personal love. Personal love will kill you. If you try so hard to help somebody with your personal love, no. I've watched that kill people. But if you bring in non-personal divine love, if you allow your body to be a conduit for a higher kind of love, I guess we could say the mighty I am presence that you're part of, but is bigger than you. So it's like, let that work on your behalf. And I think that you and I, people like us, we're so willing to do whatever it is. I go to other people's houses, and if the trash isn't empty, I just want to go empty it. It's like,
My husband is laughing at me. I go and clean other people's pantries and their fridges them because it's a nightmare. And I'm like, can I just help you create some order here? And people are like, oh my gosh, yes. Hi. Yes, okay. Talking about self-esteem and self-confidence, you talk about Sandra L. Brown's experience working with women that have come from vampire relationships. And up to 75% of those women come from a household where there's no evidence of neglect or abuse, which is exactly my childhood. My childhood was absolutely idyllic. But then you say that if you think a little bit more about it, if you dig a little bit deeper, you'll find that these super trait women actually have some dings in their self-esteem.
Yes.
The question is, how do we realize that we actually have these dings in our self-esteem, especially considering the traits that we have look like very good self-confidence to the world?
Yes. So what you do is you ask yourself, what have I always been longing to hear about myself? What is it that would make me feel complete? Because that's how the energy vampire hooks you. Yes. They tell you the things you've always wanted to hear. Yes. You are beautiful. You are desirable. You are everything that I have ever wanted. I want to give you an example. So one time I was on call for an entire weekend of doing deliveries, and the nurses were changing shifts every 8 hours. Yeah. And they would say to each other when the new shift came on, they would say to the others, have you had your break? And nobody was ever asking me if I had my break. I was there 72 solid hours, and nobody ever said, you look tired. Why don't you put your feet up? Yes. Like, can I bring you a cup of coffee? Would you like to, why don't you take a nap? I'll take your beeper and I'll cover for, no. Yes. Because the culture for many of us is like, in business and in medicine growing up is don't ask for a lighter pack, ask for a stronger back. So you think that you can be superwoman, and because you're so capable, you take on more and more because of that soul wound, that you're not quite enough. So what you do, there's two things that we have to do, each of us. We have to take care of the little inner child, but we can't let the inner child drive the bus. So that's the main thing. So you take care of the inner child, but also you show up as an adult. And I believe there's an exercise in the book given to me by Doris Cohen, The 7 Steps of Joy. And she talks about going back into the magic garden to nurture the little child, say to the child, I love you, I'll be back. You separate from the child, because in each of us, there's a part of us that has been run by a wounded, let's say, 7-year-old. So your endocrine, immune, and central nervous system are being run by this holograph of a 7-year-old inside you who's never healed. And it's your job to heal that inner child. And so we've got a program to do that. And the first time I did it was 40 days, which is a kind of a magic metaphysical number. Jesus was in the desert 40 days and 40 nights.
That was where the 40 days came from for that exercise.
Yes. And also the other 40 days are the Jews were wandering in the desert for 40 years, even though it's not that far. I mean, it wouldn't have taken them 40 years, but that's symbolic. Doris taught me it's symbolic. 40 years is 2 generations. That's the amount of time it takes to get slavery out of a whole culture.
Wow.
So what you do is you're putting yourself first, and you do this little exercise with visiting your child in the magic garden and grow the child up. I did the exercise with my 49-year-old self when I went through a divorce, and because I felt like some of the circumstances where I felt like I had been shot and stabbed in the heart on the same day. So Doris said to me, so go back and, like a surgeon, remove the bullet and stitch up the wound. And I found that, by the way, the unconscious is what comes in dreams. And like if you have a bad dream, you can go into that dream in waking hours and change the outcome. You do the same. So she said, just go and repair that wounded part of yourself. And I did it for 40 days, and it was just like having a patient. There would be days when I'd go into the magic garden, see myself, I would just be asleep in a hospital bed, like for 3 days in a row. And then finally, at first I'd have to pack the wound. I couldn't stitch it up, all kinds of stuff like that. We each have that ability to heal ourselves. But the first step is to realize that there is a little kid in there who's been crying for your attention for your whole life. And it is your job as the adult to take care of him or her. No one else can do it. So we keep looking. And what energy vampires do, they prey on the wound because they know they can get your money, your sexuality, your energy by telling you they will take care of that little part of you. And they never will. And they never will. So and then as soon as you wake up, they move on to someone else.
To the next person. They essentially speak to that inner child of you.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's a beautiful explanation of that. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, you also quote Abraham as channeled by Esther Hicks. You can't get sick enough to help sick people get better. You cannot get poor enough to help poor people thrive. And then you add to this by saying, when you dim your light to please others, the whole world gets darker. So take care of yourself. How do you see the social media trend of self-care playing into this, especially considering these women like us are hardwired for guilt? And it's difficult for us to take that step of self-care and not see it as something to feel guilty about.
That's right. So you need to practice. So I'll tell you what I do. I have several people in my life, including my own daughters, and we have learned how to overcome this through bragging. And my friend Melanie Erickson, who's a healer in Florida, she calls it a celebrag. So if there's something that you've done that you're really proud of to take care of yourself, like today, I had a chance to help somebody move, but I would have had to cancel my massage. So I chose my massage.
Yes.
Okay. So if that would make you feel guilty in the past, and that kind of thing used to make me feel guilty. I used to always have to hide the fact that I was getting a massage. I felt so guilty about it.
Yes,
okay. So now what I do is anything like that, I will either text or send a voice memo to one of my friends and say, I have a celebrag. I'm going to brag that I did. And so, because what you want to do, you've got to surround yourself with women or men who truly uplift you.
Yes.
And it's like taking the conversation higher, like fanning the flames of your magnificence. And what women have done for centuries is they've dragged each other down. Oh, must be nice. It must be nice. You get a massage. I've got to do the dishes, like that. So instead, you surround yourself with a group of friends with whom you can take it higher. And I learned this from Regina Thomas Hauer, who used to run the Mama Gina School of Womanly Arts in New York City. And I taught there for a while. And my daughters were students there. And it was a whole group of women from all over the world. And we were learning the deliberate pursuit of pleasure and with turning things around. It's also based on the work of Florence Scovel Shinn, who wrote The Book of Life and How to Play It, which is also very Louise Hay.
Yes.
And Louise, by the way, had a beautiful, she grew up with nothing. I mean, so poor, and she had an awful stepfather who beat her. He was so abusive. She had a baby at the age of 17, which she gave up for adoption. She had cervical cancer. She had all of this. And then the man of her dreams divorced her after 12 years of marriage. And she said, he made me Louise Hay. But I remember when I first went to visit Louise, and she had a Rolls Royce in a garage with wall-to-wall carpeting. Now, toward the end of her life, she didn't need that anymore. She had a smart car. I mean, a car the size of a postage stamp. But she said, I grew up with nothing. So she had no guilt whatsoever about material wealth, none. And she would say, I love writing checks to my authors. I love prospering others. And she did.
Yes.
So everything about Hay House was a family that practiced what they preached while Louise was at the helm. So we have to notice when we're feeling guilty about something good. We have to increase our capacity to receive. And you do it by, you start with accepting compliments. Oh, that's a lovely dress you're wearing. And you say, thank you. You don't downplay the compliment by saying, oh yeah, I got it for $5 at the thrift store. Don't do that. And then you don't have to, and you don't have to give them a compliment in return. You literally, and so practice this, you literally practice, thank you. Thank you. And make that be enough. That's receiving. And we women need to practice that.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Can you close the blinds, please? That is a very difficult thing. And I started doing a little while ago. I used to feel so guilty about having to test my blood sugar and have to give my insulin shots before we would sit down and eat, because we always sit down at a table to eat.
Yes, which is really important. Yeah.
Yes. So I would always set the table, and I'm very pedantic. I love my table to look beautiful when we eat, because I really enjoy food. I'm a qualified chef as well, so I really,
nice.
if I put that effort into food, then we're all going to really enjoy it together. And then I would feel so guilty about having to test my sugar, until my husband said to me one day, baby, none of us mind that you do this. Why do you feel guilty? We all of us are happy for you to sit here and do it. And that's when I realized it's all these things are in my own head. I make myself feel guilty. Nobody else is doing it in my family. I must stop doing it. But yes.
Well, some of this is what Eckhart Tolle calls the pain body, which was, of course, not in the book, but that we inherit that. So everybody has a certain amount of a pain body that they inherit from their parents, from their background of any kind. Like if you're a Native American, you have a certain pain body. Women have a certain pain body. Vietnam vets have a certain pain body. And it's our job to simply dissolve that pain body with our presence. But as Eckhart Tolle says, the pain body is a semi-conscious being, and it only stays alive by being fed. And so, and it'll stay dormant for days, and then it wants to come up and be fed. And it's often fed the best by our families, because that's why we chose our families, so that we could grow spiritually.
Yes, grow through these lessons and everything.
Yes.
What does building trust in yourself look like for you?
Over time, you begin to realize, like you have said, your intuition has been right on the mark. So over time, when you are celebrated for having your intuition be right, or when you have an inkling, you have a hunch about something, and it turns out to be right, you write that in a journal, or you somehow celebrate it. You have to make it real by doing a ritual, a celebration, something around when something is working.
I love
that. Like even in your case, starting this outreach that you're doing, you want to celebrate. And then what I do, I look back. I have journals from the 70s, and I look back to see how far I have come. I write goals, but then I see how far I have come. And I've always noticed, by the way, that writing goals is not the same as giving God a shopping list. It's something that you want, but God, as God comes through you as you, probably has a bigger plan, a different plan. And so you set the goal, and then you let it go. It's always like a paradox. And over time, you find that there's a path in front of you, and it opens up. But it's like the headlights on a dark, dark night, the headlights of your car. You can only see so far ahead.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like Mike Dooley says, if you want to go in a certain direction, you don't need to see the end. You only need to see the couple of meters ahead of you where you need to go. You don't.
And when you listen to Mike Dooley's story, his personal story, he gave us that whole thing, every bit of it, at a Hay House event last year, and it was just astounding, the kind of courage that he had. And he ended his presentation, and he's married to this beautiful woman, and he has this lovely little daughter, and Mike thought he would never have any of that. And he's so grateful for everything. So but there's one thing I want to say that isn't said enough at Hay House or in these spiritual, and that is what Mario Martinez calls righteous anger.
Yes.
And that's one of the causes of health. And it's very, very important to allow yourself to feel angry when your innocence or the innocence of someone else has been threatened. Like I just was looking at a documentary about lead poisoning and how common it is in the United States, and how little the regulations are doing about it. And it makes you, in the moment, you've got to be furious.
Yes.
And then you move on. You can't stay in anger. You can't stay there. It doesn't serve you, but you must feel it. And that's what he said about the monks who have the diabetes, the type 2 diabetes, is that when they go right to loving kindness, their endorphin levels rise and their blood sugar rises, because they're being too sweet.
Yes.
They're being too sweet. But when you're angry first, then you can go to loving kindness after that.
That's definitely a problem with me, because I'll always move into forgiveness first. And it's something that even my husband and I struggle with, because he's like, but I'm angry. I need to be angry through this. And I'm always like, okay, well, be angry and then let it go. And I think this book has been sent on my path to go, like, it's okay to sometimes be angry. Obviously, you don't want to be stuck in anger, but absolutely have to feel that.
Yeah,
So,
and it's jet fuel. It's jet fuel for getting off your bum to actually do something.
yes,
And I believe that we people who call ourselves spiritual and, light warriors and all of that, we need to be a warrior, but we also, need to know when to stop that. For most of us, there's not enough warrior.
yes,
When you look at I've never, for instance, liked the kind of activism I've seen, like peace marches, and that's never made sense to me.
love
However,
that in the book.
right, because there's so much anger, and again, what Eckhart Tolle says is very often those movements are led
Mm,
by someone whose pain body is so dense that they will eventually erode the movement
mm,
because they'll turn everyone against each other.
mm,
So you must do it from a very high vibration.
mm,
And, that's where I am currently. We have a citizen referendum on the vaccine mandates in our
mm,
state of Maine. And I've been very active in this. I've never been politically active in anything. I'm a registered independent.
mm,
But what I do is think, okay, Maine is the farthest east state in the United States. The sun rises
mm,
out here, and
yes,
then the sun, our energy, goes all the way across. So if we can do something in Maine, it could change the entire United States, maybe the whole
love
planet.
that.
And I just stay with that
Mm,
and then let the outcome go. But I'll
mm,
do everything in my power
yes,
to get people to the polls. I
true.
will do that, but also let it go and have a good time at the same time. It's a
Yes,
paradox, you see. Yeah.
yes. It's, and there's so many other paradoxes in my life. And often when I say to people, um, do you realize the paradoxes? And a lot of people, I don't think they quite understand what I mean. So it's so nice to talk to you. And so much
Right.
what you're saying is absolutely true. Um, in some of your previous books, Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom, and I think you said it in one of your other books as well, but I couldn't, I've read all of your books. You said that one of the best ways to heal is through laughter, as it decreases the stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline. And we've spoken about this earlier as well. Can you tell us how humor can be harnessed to heal the archetypal wounds of shame?
Yes. Here's how you do it. So let's say that you're feeling shame about your body or whatever it is. This is how good comedians are, by the way. They take the most shameful thing and then they make fun of it. So let's say that you're feeling really ashamed about something. I don't know, turning 50, turning 40, because people are ashamed also. We're meant to be ashamed of our body size or
Yes.
whatever. And so what you do when you're feeling the shame and you're wallowing in the shame, the only way to dissolve shame is to shine light on it. And so how you bring in more love is you talk about what you're ashamed of in public, and then, or with one other person. And then their job is to say, I love you right there. So I want to give you an example. I was at a workshop where a young woman, was talking about how she often watched pornography
Mm-hmm.
and felt terrible about it. And as she's telling us that she likes to look at pornography, we all look at her and we say, we love you right there.
Wow.
You know what happened? She never needed to watch it again.
Again. Huh.
No, it's like it's just a part of you that wants to be acknowledged.
Mm.
So it's like, okay, is that the worst thing that ever happened to you? I love you right there. I
Okay.
love you right there.
Absolutely.
And then another way to do it, which I learned from Matt Kahn, is to give yourself credit. And you'll say, I feel so ashamed of the cellulite on my thighs. Nobody has ever done shame about their thighs better than me. I am the world champion thigh hater, and I'm going to get a trophy for it because nobody does it like me. You do that. You see, you give it some irreverent humor, and that will often take care of it, because shame gets you all, pulls in
And yes.
your energy. So what you want to do is make fun of yourself for the shame. I mean, but with a wide open heart.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you have kids.
Yes.
So, you know, when, here's an example. So my little granddaughter comes home from school and someone said to her she was bossy. And she said, I was embarrassed. And her mother, my daughter, says, oh, bossy. No, that means you're a leader. I'm a leader. Your grandmother is a leader. We're all bossy. We're leaders.
Yes.
And then she just, so anything that would have been shame, oh, some boy called me bossy, we just dissolved it, because the way you dissolve the pain body is you just stay in presence around it. And then it can kind of go away, where there's no judgment. There's just sort of loving presence of who you really are.
Yes.
And then the pain body just dissolves.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow, that's genius. Okay. Last question. Sorry, I've kept you way too long already. Tell us about the other, or some of the other good things about this book that you want people to know about. I know there's so many, so one or two we're going to have to do, yeah.
Okay, I want people to know how common it is and how underappreciated or underdiagnosed it has been, and that it will provide you with freedom for living your life fully, because you will no longer think that it is your job to take care of somebody who has a character disorder, that, you know, they need to look in the mirror and own who they are, what they have done. Most won't, but you don't ever need to have this adversely affect you again. There is freedom here, the likes of which you can't even imagine. There will come a time when you'll have indifference to this kind of character. You'll no longer be attracted to them.
Yes.
And it's a wonderful thing.
Open. Thank you so much. This conversation has been so good on a soul level as well for me. I want to say thank you for being brave enough to always share your journey. Absolutely, in every book that you write, you give so many of your personal experiences. And oftentimes when I read those things, I think to myself, how can you think that you are not one of the most beautiful people on this planet? I call you a global treasure. So thank you once again for your time today. I really appreciate it. I do want to say, I don't want people to buy a single copy of your book. I want them to go and buy multiple copies of your book, because they need to buy one for themselves, one for their mom, one for their friend, one for their sister, because this book is going to be something that will heal and help them immensely. So thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. You are a real soul sister.
Thank you. May you have a blessed 2020 as well. I know it's still Old Year's Eve where you are.
Yes.
Over here in Australia, the sun has risen. It is a beautiful day already. And I'm full of goosebumps while I'm sitting here thinking that already we can bring all this change into the new year. So thank you for that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Goodbye.
All right. Goodbye.
To find out more about Dr. Northrup, join her worldwide community on www.drnorthrup.com. That is drnorthrup.com. Or you can find her on Facebook at Dr. Christian Northrup, and her internet radio show called Flourish.